The winter of 1875 descended upon New Mexico territory like a silent prayer, transforming the harsh landscape into something almost sacred. Snow blanketed the mountains surrounding Santa Fe, covering the adobe buildings and wooden structures with a pristine whiteness that seemed to promise peace. A peace that was as fragile as the frost clinging to the window panes of the Wycliffe mansion. June Wycliffe stood at her bedroom window, watching the snowflakes drift lazily from the gray sky. At 23, she was considered by many to be the finest catch in the territory, the daughter of Marcus Wycliffe, one of the most prosperous merchants between Santa Fe and Albuquerque. Her father's trading business had flourished, bringing fine goods from the east, and establishing connections that made the Wycliffe name synonymous with wealth and respectability. But respectability was a cage, June had come to realize. A gilded one, certainly, with its elegant dinner parties, its imported silk gowns, its carefully orchestrated social gatherings, where every word was measured and every gesture calculated. She moved through that world like a ghost, playing her part with practiced grace while something deep inside her yearned for... what? She couldn't even name it. "Miss June, your father wishes to see you in his study," called Martha, the housekeeper, from the doorway. June turned from the window, smoothing the deep green velvet of her dress. "Thank you, Martha. Tell him I'll be down directly." As she descended the grand staircase, her gloved hand trailing along the polished banister, she heard voices coming from her father's study, her father's booming baritone, and another voice, deeper, quieter, speaking in accented English. A business associate, no doubt. Her father was always conducting business, always expanding his empire. She paused outside the study door, about to continue past to the sitting room where her mother would be embroidering by the fire, when her father called out, "June, come in here, daughter. I want you to meet someone." She hesitated, her hand on the doorframe. It wasn't proper for a young lady to be present during business discussions, but her father had always been somewhat unconventional in that regard. He believed his children, even his daughters, should understand the workings of commerce and trade. Taking a breath, June pushed open the door and stepped inside, and her world shifted on its axis. The man standing beside her father's desk was unlike anyone she had ever seen. Tall, easily over 6 feet, with shoulders that seemed to fill the space, he wore buckskin leggings and a shirt that combined both Apache and American elements, a silver concho belt at his waist. His hair was long and black as a moonless night, hanging past his shoulders in thick waves that caught the lamplight. But it was his face that stole her breath, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, lips that seemed carved from stone, and eyes. Heavens, those eyes. Dark as the deepest canyon, they turned to her as she entered, and June felt something strike her chest like a physical blow. "Ah, there you are," her father said, oblivious to the sudden tension crackling in the air. "June, this is Onas. Has come to discuss some matters regarding safe passage for our wagons through Apache lands. Onas, my daughter June." Onas didn't bow, didn't incline his head in the polite gesture she was accustomed to. He simply looked at her, his gaze moving over her face with an intensity that made her cheeks flame. She felt exposed, as if those dark eyes could see through the layers of propriety and breeding to something raw and unnamed beneath. "Miss Wycliffe," he said, and his voice was like smoke, rough, dark, intoxicating. "Mr. Onas," she managed, though her voice came out breathier than she intended. Her heart was pounding so hard she was certain everyone in the room could hear it. Her knees felt weak, trembling beneath her heavy skirts. What was wrong with her? Was this fear? It had to be fear. This man was Apache, one of the warriors her father's friends spoke about in hushed, worried tones. The peace agreement was fragile, they said. The Apache could turn on them at any moment. She should be terrified, but the heat flooding her body, the way her pulse raced, the strange tightness in her chest, was that fear, or something far more dangerous? "Just Onas," he corrected, still watching her with those unnerving eyes. A slight smile curved his lips, as if he knew exactly what effect he was having on her. "June, why don't you have Martha bring us some coffee?" her father suggested. "This discussion may take a while." She nodded mutely, grateful for the excuse to escape that penetrating gaze. But as she turned to leave, she felt Onas watching her, his eyes burning into her back like twin flames. Her hands were shaking as she closed the door behind her. In the hallway, she pressed her palm against her chest, trying to calm her racing heart. What had just happened? She had met countless men, suitors approved by her parents, business associates, friends of the family. None of them had ever made her feel like this, as if the ground had suddenly disappeared beneath her feet. She found Martha in the kitchen and delivered her father's request in a voice that sounded steadier than she felt. Then, instead of returning to the sitting room where her mother waited, June found herself drawn back toward the study, staying just out of sight in the hallway, listening to the deep rumble of Onas's voice as he discussed routes and territories with her father. She didn't understand why she couldn't walk away, why she stood there in the shadows like a foolish girl, hanging on every word spoken in that dark, smoky voice. When Martha finally brought the coffee and June had to step aside to let her pass, she felt like she'd been caught doing something shameful. The meeting lasted over an hour. June tried to busy herself with needlework in the sitting room, but she couldn't concentrate. Her mother made several comments about her distracted state, but June barely heard them. Her mind was full of dark eyes and a presence that seemed to fill every corner of her thoughts. When she finally heard the study door open and masculine footsteps in the hallway, she set down her embroidery and rose, pretending to straighten the books on a nearby shelf. Through the doorway she could see her father and Onas shaking hands. "I appreciate your time, Mr. Wycliffe," Onas was saying. "I believe we can ensure safe passage for your wagons." "Excellent, excellent," her father replied. "I'll have the contracts drawn up by week's end." As Onas turned to leave, his eyes found June across the hall. He paused, and for a moment time seemed to stop. He looked at her with an expression that made her insides turn to liquid heat, possessive, knowing, hungry. Then, so quietly that only she could hear, he said, "Miss Wycliffe." It wasn't a greeting. It was a promise. And then he was gone, the front door closing behind him with a soft click that seemed to echo through the entire house. June stood frozen, her hand still resting on a leather-bound volume, her entire body trembling. Her mother was saying something about the audacity of her father conducting business with savages, but June couldn't hear her over the roaring in her ears. That night, sleep eluded her. She lay in her four-poster bed, staring at the ceiling while snow continued to fall outside her window. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him, those dark, penetrating eyes, that slight smile, the way he had looked at her like he could see into her very soul. She told herself it was fear, it had to be fear. But deep down, in a place she didn't dare examine too closely, June knew the truth. What she felt was far more dangerous than fear. It was desire, raw, inexplicable, and absolutely forbidden. The days that followed were torture. June found herself starting at every sound, hoping and dreading in equal measure that Onas might return to finalize the business arrangement with her father. She caught herself staring out windows, scanning the snowy landscape for a tall figure on horseback. At night, he invaded her dreams. Not nightmares, but something far more disturbing. Dreams where those strong hands touched her face, where that dark voice whispered words she couldn't quite hear, but that made her wake, gasping and flushed. She tried to push him from her mind. She attended church services, suffered through tea with the minister's wife and her insufferable daughters, smiled politely at George Thornton when he came calling with flowers and earnest declarations of his regard. George was everything her parents wanted for her, wealthy, respectable, boring as dust. She should want him. She should be grateful for his attention. Instead, she found herself comparing him to a wild Apache warrior and finding him desperately lacking. "You seem distracted, my dear," her mother observed one afternoon as they sat in the parlor. Outside, snow continued its relentless fall. "Are you feeling well?" "Just tired, Mother," June lied, setting down her teacup with a hand that wasn't quite steady. "Perhaps you should rest before the Hendersons' dinner party tonight." Her mother's eyes were sharp, assessing. "You've been quite pale lately, and George will be there. You'll want to look your best." George. Yes, proper, respectable George, who had never made her heart race or her knees weak, who had never looked at her like he could devour her whole. That evening, dressed in a gown of sapphire silk that brought out the blue in her eyes, June sat through dinner at the Hendersons' elegant home and tried to focus on George's conversation about his father's cattle business. But her mind kept drifting, kept circling back to a face she couldn't forget and a feeling she couldn't name. It was Mrs. Henderson's son, Robert, recently returned from serving with the cavalry, who finally said what everyone seemed to be thinking. "Father tells me Wycliffe's been dealing with that Apache," Robert said, his voice thick with contempt. "Onas, they call him. Dangerous savage. They say he's killed more white men than anyone can count." June's fork clattered against her plate. Every eye at the table turned to her. "Sorry," she murmured, feeling heat flood her cheeks. "Clumsy of me." "Onas is an interesting case," Mr. Henderson said, his tone more measured than his son's. "Ruthless fighter, certainly. But since the peace agreement, he's kept his word. More than can be said for some on both sides." "Still a savage," Robert insisted. "No amount of peace talks changes what they are." "Robert, please," Mrs. Henderson said with a nervous glance at June. "This isn't appropriate dinner conversation." But the damage was done. June felt sick, her stomach churning. Was that who he was? A killer? A savage, as they called him? She thought of those dark eyes, that slight smile, the way he had looked at her. There had been intelligence there, and something else, something that had called to a part of her she didn't know existed. She excused herself early, claiming a headache that wasn't entirely false. George offered to escort her home, but her father waved him off, calling for their carriage instead. The ride home was silent, her father absorbed in his thoughts, her mother dozing lightly against the cushions. June stared out at the snow-covered landscape, silvered by moonlight, and tried to understand what was happening to her. She was a Wycliffe. She had been raised with every advantage, taught to value propriety and respectability above all else. She should be horrified by her reaction to Onas. She should be grateful for George's stable, predictable affection. Instead, she felt like she was suffocating. That night, unable to sleep, June wrapped herself in a heavy cloak and slipped down to the library. The house was quiet, the servants long since retired. She lit a lamp and found herself drawn to her father's collection of books about the territory. Accounts of explorations, studies of the various Indian tribes, journals from traders and soldiers. She found mentions of Apache warriors, of their fierce defense of their lands, of battles won and lost. And she found references to Onas, scattered, brief, but always spoken of with a mixture of fear and grudging respect. The fiercest of them, one account said, a man who has never lost a fight, never backed down, never shown mercy to his enemies. But there was more. Another account, written by a Franciscan priest who had spent time among the Apache, spoke of Onas differently. A man of great intelligence and unexpected honor, the priest had written. While fierce in battle, he is known among his people for wisdom beyond his years. He speaks several languages, understands the ways of both his people and ours, and has worked harder than any to maintain the fragile peace. June closed the book, her hands trembling. Who was he really? The ruthless killer Robert Henderson had described? The wise peacemaker the priest had written about? Or something more complex, a man shaped by a brutal world, trying to navigate between two cultures that hated each other? And why did she care so much? She knew the answer even as she tried to deny it. She cared because something had happened when their eyes met. Something instantaneous and undeniable. She cared because she hadn't been able to stop thinking about him for a single moment since. She cared because, heavens help her, she wanted to see him again. She wanted to see him with an intensity that terrified her. The opportunity came 2 weeks later, in a way she never could have anticipated. Her father announced at breakfast that he would be traveling to Albuquerque for several days to oversee a large shipment arriving from St. Louis. Her mother immediately declared that she would accompany him. There were fabrics she wished to see, and the Albuquerque shops were far superior to Santa Fe's limited offerings. "You'll stay here with Martha and the staff, of course," her mother told June. "Mrs. Thornton has invited you to tea on Thursday and the minister's wife on Saturday. You'll be perfectly well chaperoned." June nodded dutifully, though her heart was suddenly racing. Days without her parents' watchful eyes. Days of freedom she hadn't experienced since childhood. They departed the next morning in the heavy coach, bundled against the cold. June stood on the front steps, waving until they disappeared around the bend in the road. Then she turned back to the house, feeling simultaneously liberated and oddly bereft. That afternoon she told Martha she was going to visit the Thorntons, and instead took her mare, Juniper, for a ride into the foothills. It was reckless. Young ladies didn't ride alone, especially not in territory where danger could come from any direction. But June needed to escape the suffocating walls of the mansion, needed to feel something real. The snow had stopped falling, and the sun had broken through the clouds, making the world sparkle like it was covered in diamonds. June urged Juniper up the trail she had ridden 100 times as a girl, before her mother had decided such activities were unladylike. The cold air burned her lungs, and she felt more alive than she had in weeks. She didn't know she was being followed until it was too late. The trail curved around a large outcropping of rock, and when she emerged on the other side, he was there. Onas sat astride a paint horse as still as a statue, watching her with those dark, unreadable eyes. June's breath caught. Juniper danced nervously beneath her, sensing her rider's sudden tension. "Miss Wycliffe," Onas said, his voice carrying easily across the space between them, "dangerous for you to be out here alone." June's voice failed her. Her heart was hammering so hard she felt dizzy. "I didn't know anyone else was here." "I know." He nudged his horse forward, closing the distance between them with slow, deliberate movements. "I've been watching you." Those words should have terrified her. Instead, they sent a thrill down her spine that she couldn't deny. "Why?" The word came out as barely a whisper. Onas stopped his horse alongside hers. Up close he was even more overwhelming, all raw power and masculine beauty that made her feel small and fragile and achingly alive. His eyes roamed over her face, and she saw hunger there, barely contained. "Because I can't stop," he said simply. "Since the day I saw you, I can't stop thinking about you. Can't stop wondering what you taste like, what your hair feels like between my fingers, what sounds you'd make if I—" He stopped abruptly, his jaw clenching. "You should go home, June." The way he said her name, without the formal "miss," just her name, in that dark, smoky voice, made something clench low in her belly. "I should," she agreed. But she didn't move, couldn't move. She was caught in his gaze like a deer in torchlight. Onas dismounted in one fluid movement. He approached her slowly, his eyes never leaving hers, giving her every chance to flee. But June sat frozen, her hands gripping the reins so tightly her knuckles were white. When he reached up and closed his hands around her waist, she gasped, but didn't resist. He lifted her down from the saddle as easily as if she weighed nothing, setting her on her feet in the snow. But he didn't let go. His hands stayed at her waist, burning through the layers of her riding habit like brands. "You should be afraid of me," Onas said quietly, his face inches from hers. "I'm everything they say I am. Dangerous. Savage. Someone who could destroy your perfect life with a single touch." "I know," June whispered. And she did know. She knew that this man, this moment, could ruin everything, but she also knew that she didn't care. "I know what you are." "Do you?" His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with heartbreaking gentleness. "Do you know that I've killed men, that I've done things that would make you sick if you knew? That your people want me dead and mine want you gone?" "Yes." Her voice was steady now, even as her body trembled. "I know all of that." "Then why aren't you running?" June looked into his eyes and saw something that matched the wild thing inside her own chest, something fierce and true and utterly without pretense. "Because I can't," she admitted. "I don't know why, but I can't." Onas made a sound low in his throat, relief and anguish and hunger all mixed together. His other hand came up to thread through her hair, loosening pins and sending her carefully arranged curls tumbling down her back. "June," he breathed, and it sounded like a prayer and a curse all at once. She stood there, trembling in the snow, while his hands explored her face, her hair, the curve of her jaw. His touch was gentle, reverent almost, as if he was memorizing her. And all the while those dark eyes held hers, seeing everything she tried to hide. Finally some sense returned to her spinning mind. This was madness, complete madness. If anyone saw them, if anyone knew— "I have to go," she said, taking a step back. His hands fell away immediately, though she could see the cost of letting her go in the tension of his jaw, the tightness around his eyes. "Yes," he agreed. "You should go." But as she turned toward Juniper, he caught her arm, pulling her back. Not roughly, but firmly enough that she stumbled against his chest. For one breathless moment they stood pressed together, and June felt the heat of him, the solid strength, the barely controlled desire. "I won't hurt you," Onas said, his voice rough. I just wanted to feel you, to look at you, to see if what I felt when I first saw you was real. And? June could barely form the word. And it's worse than I thought. He released her, stepping back. Because now I know you're not just beautiful. You're real. And I want you more than I've ever wanted anything in my life. June's legs nearly buckled. She grabbed Juniper's saddle for support, her breath coming in short gasps. Onas mounted his horse with effortless grace. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable once more. Go home, June Wycliffe. Forget you saw me here. Forget what just happened. Marry your respectable man and live your safe life. Will you forget? The question burst from her before she could stop it. His smile was bitter and beautiful. No. I'll remember every second of this for the rest of my life. Then he wheeled his horse around and rode off, disappearing into the trees and leaving June standing alone in the snow, trembling not from cold but from something far more dangerous, something that felt terrifyingly like destiny. June made it home in a daze, barely remembering the ride back. Martha met her at the door, clucking disapprovingly at her disheveled appearance and windswept hair. "Miss June, whatever happened? You look like you've been through a storm." "Just a long ride, Martha," June managed, handing over her cloak with shaking hands. "The wind was stronger than I expected." She retreated to her room and sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her reflection in the vanity mirror. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes too bright, her hair falling in wild tangles around her shoulders. She looked like a stranger, or perhaps for the first time she looked like herself. The feeling of his hands on her face, in her hair, would not leave her. June closed her eyes and could still feel the warmth of his palm against her cheek, could still hear his voice saying her name like it was something precious and profane all at once. "I want you more than I've ever wanted anything in my life." She should be horrified. She should be scandalized. Instead, she felt alive in a way she never had before, as if every moment of her 23 years had been leading to this, to standing in the snow with a dangerous man's hands on her and realizing that everything she'd been taught about who she should be was a lie. That night, June didn't sleep. She lay in bed, watching the moon track across her window, and admitted the truth she'd been running from since the moment she first saw him. She was falling in love with Onas. No, she was already in love with him. Hopelessly, impossibly, catastrophically in love with a man she barely knew, a man who represented everything her world considered dangerous and wrong. And the terrifying part was that she didn't want to stop. The next 3 days passed in a blur. June went through the motions of her daily life. Tea with Mrs. Thornton, where she barely heard a word of the gossip. Church services where she couldn't focus on the minister's sermon. Hours in the parlor pretending to read while her thoughts circled endlessly back to dark eyes and gentle hands. She found herself riding out every afternoon, telling Martha she needed the fresh air. She always took the same trail, the one where she'd encountered Onas, hoping and fearing in equal measure that he would appear again. He never did. By the 4th day, she was beginning to think she'd imagined the entire encounter, that it had been some fever dream brought on by her own restless dissatisfaction with her prescribed life. Her parents would return the next day, and life would resume its normal, suffocating pattern. That afternoon, unable to bear the confinement of the house any longer, June saddled Juniper and headed out once more. This time she rode farther than usual, following the trail as it climbed higher into the foothills. The sun was starting to descend, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink, and she knew she should turn back. But something drove her forward, a need she couldn't name, a pull she couldn't resist. The trail opened into a small meadow ringed by pines, and there, in the center of that perfect circle of untouched snow, was Onas. He sat on a fallen log, seemingly waiting, though he gave no sign of surprise when she appeared. His horse was tethered nearby, cropping at the sparse grass, poking through the snow. June pulled Juniper to a halt at the edge of the clearing. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy with everything unspoken, everything impossible. "I've been coming here every day," Onas finally said, his eyes never leaving her face. "Hoping you would too." June dismounted slowly, her legs unsteady. "Why?" "Because I can't stay away." He stood, and even across the distance separating them, she could feel the intensity radiating from him. "I've tried. I've told myself all the reasons this is madness. But I can't stop thinking about you, June. Can't stop wanting to see you, talk to you, be near you." "It is madness," June said, but she was walking toward him even as she spoke, drawn like iron to a lodestone. "We barely know each other. Our worlds are—" "I know." He closed the remaining distance between them in 3 long strides. "I know every reason why this is impossible, but tell me you haven't felt it too. Tell me you haven't been going out of your mind thinking about what happened between us." June's breath caught. She should lie, she should deny it, mount her horse, and ride away from this man and the dangerous feelings he stirred in her. But when had she ever been brave enough to tell the truth? Now. Right now she would be brave. "I can't stop thinking about you," she whispered. "Every moment of every day you're there in my mind. I dream about you at night. I wake up reaching for something I can't name. And I'm terrified, Onas, because I don't know what this is or what it means, but I can't make it stop." The sound he made was part growl, part groan. His hands came up to frame her face, and this time there was nothing gentle about his touch. It was desperate, claiming, as if he'd been starving and she was his first meal. "Say it," he demanded, his forehead pressed against hers, his breath hot against her lips. "Say what you're feeling. I need to hear you say it." "I don't know what to call it," June confessed, her hands fisting in the front of his buckskin shirt. "All I know is that when I'm with you, I feel like I can finally breathe. Like I've been asleep my whole life and you've woken me up." "That's how I feel," Ona said roughly. "Like I've been waiting for you without knowing it. Like everything I've done, every battle I've fought, every choice I've made has been leading me to you." His thumb traced her lower lip and June shivered. "I'm in love with you, June Wycliffe. Completely. Impossibly. And I know you feel it too." She did. Heavens help her, she did. It was insane and reckless, and would destroy both their lives, but it was also the most real thing she'd ever felt. "Yes," she breathed. "I love you. I don't know how or why, but I do. I love you so much it scares me." The kiss, when it came, was like lightning splitting the sky, fierce and bright and utterly transformative. His lips claimed hers with a hunger that matched her own, and June kissed him back with an abandon she didn't know she possessed. Her hands wound into his hair, pulling him closer, closer, while his arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her nearly off her feet. It was nothing like the chaste pecks George had stolen on her cheek. This was raw and primal and absolutely perfect. She could taste desperation on his lips, feel the tremor in his hands as they held her, sense the iron control he was exerting to keep from taking more than she was ready to give. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, June felt like a different person entirely. The girl who had ridden up into these hills was gone, replaced by a woman who had tasted passion and would never be satisfied with anything less. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Onas, what can we possibly do? My family will never accept this. Your people—" "I don't care about any of that," he interrupted fiercely. "All I care about is you. We'll find a way, June. We have to." "How?" The reality of their situation was crashing down on her now, cold and unforgiving as the snow beneath their feet. "I'm expected to marry George Thornton. My parents have practically announced the engagement already. And you're Apache. The peace is so fragile. If anyone found out about us, it could destroy everything. Then we'll be careful." He pulled her close again, his chin resting on top of her head. "We'll meet in secret until we can figure out what to do. I won't lose you, June. Not now that I've found you." June wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that love could conquer the impossible barriers between them. But she'd been raised in a world that taught her the cost of scandal, the price of defying social order. "I'm so scared," she admitted against his chest. "Scared of losing you. Scared of what loving you means. Scared that this will all come crashing down and destroy us both." "Then let it," Onas said with quiet intensity. "Let the world burn. As long as I have you, nothing else matters." They stood there in the snow-covered meadow as the sun sank lower, holding each other like they could keep the entire world at bay through sheer force of will. And for that perfect stolen moment, it almost felt possible. They began meeting in secret, a dangerous game that grew more reckless with each passing day. June would tell Martha she was visiting friends or shopping in town, and instead she would ride out to their meadow where Onas would be waiting. Sometimes they talked for hours, sharing stories of their vastly different childhoods, their hopes and fears and dreams. Sometimes they simply sat in companionable silence, watching the snow fall or the clouds drift across the impossibly blue sky. And sometimes they gave in to the hunger that burned between them, kissing until they were both breathless and aching with want. June learned about his world, about Apache traditions and beliefs, about the years of war and the impossible position he occupied as a man trying to maintain peace between two cultures that despised each other. Onnes had been educated by missionaries as a child, but had rejected their attempts to civilize him, choosing instead to walk a line between the Apache way and the white man's world. "They call me a traitor," he told her one afternoon as they sat on their log, her hand clasped in his. "My own people. They say I've sold them out by negotiating with your father and others like him." "And have you?" June asked quietly. "No." His jaw tightened. "I'm trying to keep them alive. The wars are over, June. We lost. But that doesn't mean we have to lose everything. If I can ensure my people keep some of our land, maintain some of our traditions, that's worth any insult they throw at me." She squeezed his hand. "You're brave. Braver than anyone I've ever known." "I don't feel brave when I'm with you," Onnes admitted. "I feel terrified, because you've given me something to lose." June understood exactly what he meant. Before Onnes, her life had felt like a series of predetermined movements, a dance she'd learned the steps to long ago. Now she had something precious and fragile and worth fighting for, and that made everything so much more dangerous. Her parents returned from Albuquerque full of news and plans. The wedding to George Thornton was being quietly arranged for spring. June sat through dinner, listening to her mother describe the guest list and the flowers and the dress she'd ordered from a dressmaker in St. Louis, and felt like she was suffocating. That night, she slipped out of her bedroom window, something she would have thought impossible a month ago, and rode through the darkness to the meadow. Onnes was there, as if he'd known she would come, and she fell into his arms, sobbing. "They're making me marry him," she gasped against his chest. "In April." "My mother has already started planning everything." Onnes held her tightly, his own body rigid with barely contained fury. "Then we run," he said. "We leave tonight. I'll take you into the mountains, somewhere they'll never find us." "They'll hunt us," June said, though the temptation was almost overwhelming. "My father has connections, resources, and if they think you've kidnapped me—" "It would be war," Onnes finished grimly. "The peace agreement would be shattered. My people would suffer." They stood there in the moonlight, trapped by circumstances neither of them could control, and June felt her heart breaking. "There has to be another way," she said desperately. "There has to be." But neither of them could see it. The following weeks were agony. June went through the motions of preparing for her wedding, while secretly spending every possible moment with Onnes. She learned the feel of his hands, memorized the planes of his face, discovered what made him laugh, a rare, beautiful sound, and what made his eyes go dark with desire. They grew bolder, meeting not just in their meadow, but in other hidden places. An abandoned line shack, a cave overlooking the valley, anywhere they could steal a few hours of privacy. And with each meeting, the physical hunger between them grew more difficult to resist. "We can't," June whispered one afternoon as his lips traced a burning path down her throat. They were in the line shack sheltered from a sudden snowstorm, and she was half lying beneath him on a pile of old blankets. "Onnes, we can't. If George finds out I'm not—" "I know." He pulled back, his breathing ragged, his eyes blazing. "I know, June. I would never do anything that would make your life harder. But mercy, it's difficult to stop when you're looking at me like that." "Like what?" "Like you want me to forget every promise I've made and just take you." She did. Heavens help her, she did want that. She wanted to give herself to him completely, consequences be damned. But the practical part of her mind, the part that understood the world she lived in, knew that would be a disaster. "Tell me we're going to find a way," she begged, cupping his face in her hands. "Tell me this isn't all we'll ever have." "We'll find a way," Onnes promised, though she could hear the doubt beneath his words. "I swear to you, June, I will find a way for us to be together." But as March turned toward April and her wedding date loomed closer, that promise felt increasingly hollow. George had begun calling more frequently, bringing gifts and making earnest conversation about their future. He was kind, June supposed, in his limited way. He would probably be a decent husband by the standards of her world, faithful provider, protector. But he wasn't Onnes. He would never make her heart race or her soul sing. He would never understand the wild, hungry part of her that had awakened in the snow. With George, she would be safe, respectable, and utterly, completely dead inside. The breaking point came 2 weeks before the wedding. June arrived at their meadow to find Onas pacing like a caged animal, his face dark with barely controlled rage. "What's wrong?" she asked, sliding down from Juniper's back. "War party," he said tersely. "Some young warriors raided a settlement east of here, killed 3 men, stole horses. The territorial governor is demanding retribution." June's blood ran cold. "What does that mean?" "It means the peace is hanging by a thread." He grabbed her shoulders, his grip almost painful. "It means if they decide to strike back at all Apache, my people will have no choice but to defend themselves. It means everything I've worked for could be destroyed. What can we do?" "Nothing." The word was bitter. "There's nothing we can do except wait and hope cooler heads prevail." His hands gentled on her shoulders, his expression shifting from anger to anguish. "And it means we can't keep doing this, June. If anyone found out about us now, if they thought I had somehow compromised you or your father's business, no." June shook her head violently. "No, I won't give you up. I won't." "You have to." Onas pulled her against him one last time, his arms tight around her. "You have to marry Thornton, live your life, forget about me." "I could never forget you," she said fiercely. "Even if I wanted to, I couldn't. You're in my blood now, Onas. You're part of me. And you're part of me." He kissed her then, deep and desperate and devastating. "Which is why you have to go. Because I love you too much to let you destroy yourself for me." June kissed him back with everything she had, pouring all her love and grief and rage into it. When they finally broke apart, she was crying. "This isn't over," she said, even as her heart was shattering. "I don't care what happens. I won't marry George. I'll find a way. June, please." His voice broke on her name. "Please don't make this harder than it already is. Go home, forget me, be safe." "I love you," she sobbed. "I love you so much." "I know." He touched her face one last time, his fingers trembling. "I love you too. More than my life. More than my honor. More than anything." Then he stepped back, and June knew he was right. She had to go. She had to walk away from the only man she would ever love and resign herself to a life of comfortable misery. But as she mounted Juniper and turned toward home, something inside her rebelled. No, she wouldn't accept this. She wouldn't let fear and prejudice and impossible circumstances steal her one chance at real happiness. She didn't know how yet, but she would find a way. She had to. Because a life without Onas wasn't a life at all. The wedding preparations consumed the Wycliffe household like a fever. June moved through the chaos in a state of numb detachment, nodding when her mother showed her fabric samples, agreeing to flower arrangements she didn't care about, standing still while dressmakers pinned and tucked the elaborate white gown that would transform her into George Thornton's wife. She hadn't seen Onas in 10 days, 10 days that felt like 10 years. She told herself she was respecting his wishes, giving him the space he needed to deal with the political crisis threatening his people. But the truth was, she was terrified. Terrified that if she saw him again, she wouldn't have the strength to walk away a second time. The territorial situation had deteriorated rapidly. The governor had ordered increased military patrols through Apache lands, and tensions were running high. June's father spoke grimly about the possibility of renewed hostilities, about protecting their property and business interests if war broke out again. George, meanwhile, had become increasingly proprietary, calling every day, bringing his mother to discuss household arrangements, making plans for their future, as if June was already his possession. She bore it all with a smile that felt painted on, a mask that grew heavier with each passing day. But at night, alone in her room, she let the mask slip. She would stand at her window staring out at the moonlit mountains and feel Onas's presence like a physical ache. She would remember his hands in her hair, his voice saying her name, the way he looked at her like she was something precious and wild and worth any risk. She couldn't marry George. Every fiber of her being rebelled against the thought. But what choice did she have? Running away would bring disaster down on Onas and his people. Refusing to marry would destroy her family's reputation and leave her with no options, a scandalous spinster with nowhere to go and no way to support herself. She was trapped in a cage built of social expectations and political necessities, and she could see no way out. The morning of her bridal fitting, Martha found her crying in the garden, her face buried in her hands as snow drifted down around her. "Miss June!" The housekeeper hurried over, her round face creased with concern. "What's wrong, child? Are you ill?" "I can't do this," June sobbed. "Martha, I can't marry him, I can't." Martha glanced around nervously, then pulled June to a bench, partially sheltered by an overgrown arbor. Now, she said, patting June's hand. "It's natural to have nerves before a wedding, but Mr. Thornton is a good man, from a good family. You'll be well provided for. I don't love him." The words burst from June like a confession. "I'll never love him. And there's someone else, someone I can't have, someone impossible, but I love him so much I can't breathe sometimes." Martha's eyes widened. "Miss June, you mustn't say such things. If your parents hurt—" "I know." June wiped her eyes, trying to pull herself together. "I know I have to go through with this. I needed to say it out loud. Just once." The housekeeper looked at her for a long moment, sympathy and worry warring in her expression. "Love isn't always enough, child," she said quietly. "Sometimes we have to think about what's practical, what's safe." "But what if safe means dying inside?" June asked. "What if practical means giving up the one thing that makes me feel alive?" Martha had no answer for that. That night, unable to sleep, June did something reckless. She slipped out of the house after everyone had retired and rode through the darkness to the meadow where she and Onas had spent so many stolen hours. She didn't expect him to be there. It was past midnight, and she'd given him no signal that she would come. But he was there, sitting on their log in the moonlight, his head bowed as if in prayer or grief. "Onas," she breathed, sliding down from Juniper's back. He looked up, and the expression on his face shattered her. He looked haunted, hollowed out, as if he'd been fighting a losing battle for days. "You shouldn't be here," he said, but he was already standing, already moving toward her. "I had to see you." June ran the last few steps and threw herself into his arms. "I can't do this, Onas. I can't marry him. I'll die if I marry him." "No." He held her tightly, his face buried in her hair. "No, you'll live. You'll have a good life, June. Children and a home and everything you deserve." "I deserve you," she said fiercely. "We deserve each other, and I don't care what it costs. I won't give you up." Onas pulled back, gripping her shoulders. "Do you know what you're saying? If you refuse to marry Thornton, your reputation will be destroyed. Your family will disown you. You'll have nothing. I'll have you. And what kind of life can I give you?" His voice was ragged with pain. "We'd be hunted, June, by your people and mine. We'd have to run, hide, live in constant fear." "Is that what you want?" "Yes." She met his eyes without flinching. "If that's the only way we can be together, then yes. I'd rather have one real day with you than a lifetime of safety with someone else." He made a sound like he'd been struck. "You don't know what you're saying. You've never been hungry, never been cold, never been hunted. You don't know what you'd be giving up. Then teach me." June grabbed his hands, pressing them to her heart. "Take me away from here tonight, right now. We'll figure it out together." For a moment she saw hope flare in his eyes, wild, desperate hope that matched her own. But then reality crashed back down, and the light died. "The territorial situation," he said dully. "June, if I disappear with you now, especially after those raids, they'll think I kidnapped you. They'll use it as an excuse to attack my people. Innocent women and children will die because of us." June felt cold dread settle in her stomach. She'd been so focused on their love, their need for each other, that she hadn't fully considered the wider implications. But Onas was right. Their personal happiness couldn't come at the cost of so many lives. "Then what do we do?" she whispered. "Tell me there's a way, please, Onas, tell me there's a way." He pulled her close again, and she could feel him trembling. "I've been thinking about nothing else for days," he admitted, "trying to find a solution that doesn't end in blood and loss. And I keep coming back to one option, one that might work if we're careful and lucky. Tell me." "I have connections," Onas said slowly. "People who owe me favors. I could arrange safe passage into Mexico, to a place where no one knows either of us. We could build a life there, away from everything." June's heart leaped with sudden hope. "Then let's do it. Let's—" "But not yet." He cupped her face, his eyes intense. "We have to wait until the territorial situation calms down. Until my disappearance won't be seen as an act of war, and you—" He took a shaky breath. "You have to go through with the wedding." "What?" "No, Onas, I can't. Listen to me." His grip tightened on her face, forcing her to focus. "We need time. Time for tensions to ease, time for me to make arrangements, time to gather supplies and money. If you call off the wedding now, there will be immediate scandal. Your father will watch you like a hawk. You won't be able to move without someone following you. But if you go through with it—" He swallowed hard. "If you marry Thornton, no one will suspect. Everyone will think you've accepted your fate. And then, when the time is right—" "You'll come for me," June finished, understanding dawning. "You'll come for me, and we'll run." "Yes." The word was heavy with promise and pain. "I'll come for you, June. I swear it on my life, on everything I hold sacred. It might take weeks, maybe a month or two, but I will find a way to get you out and take you somewhere we can be together." June's mind was reeling. He was asking her to marry another man, to give herself to another man, all while waiting and hoping he could rescue her. The thought made her physically ill. What if George— She couldn't finish the sentence. "Then we deal with it," Onas said grimly. "I won't lie to you, June. I hate the thought of him touching you. It makes me want to commit murder. But your survival is more important than my jealousy. And if that's the price we have to pay for a chance at a life together—" "I'll do it," June interrupted. The words felt like glass in her throat, but she forced them out. "I'll marry him. I'll play the perfect wife, and I'll wait for you." Relief and anguish warred on Onas's face. "You're the bravest person I've ever known," he said softly. "And I promise you, no matter how long it takes, no matter what I have to do, I will come for you. I will find you, and we will be together." "Promise me," June demanded. "Swear it, Onas. Swear you won't leave me trapped in that life." "I swear it." He kissed her then, fierce and claiming and desperate. "Run all you want. Pretend all you need to. But you're mine, June Wycliffe. You're mine, and I'm yours, and nothing will change that. Not distance, not time, not another man's ring on your finger. I will find you, always." They made love that night in the line shack, with snow falling outside and the future a terrifying uncertainty. June gave herself to him completely, without reservation, pouring all her love and faith into every touch, every kiss. If this was all they would have for weeks or months to come, she would make it enough to sustain them both. Afterward, wrapped in his arms beneath rough blankets, she whispered, "What if something goes wrong? What if you can't get to me?" "Then I'll die trying," Onas said simply, "because a life without you isn't a life I want to live." June believed him. She had to believe him. It was the only thing that would get her through what was coming. As dawn approached and she prepared to ride back to her life of lies, Onas caught her hand one last time. "When I come for you," he said, his eyes burning into hers, "be ready. I won't be able to give you warning. It could be the middle of the night or broad daylight, but when you see me, you have to trust me and come immediately. Can you do that?" "Yes." June squeezed his hand, trying to memorize the feel of it. "I'll be ready. I'll be watching for you every moment." "Good." He pulled her into one last kiss, this one tender and achingly sweet. "I love you, June. Remember that when things get hard. Remember that somewhere out there I'm fighting to get back to you." "I love you too," she whispered against his lips, "more than anything, more than my own life." Then she mounted Juniper and rode toward the dawn, toward her wedding, toward a man she didn't love, but carrying in her heart the promise of a man who would move heaven and earth to claim her. She just had to be strong enough to survive until he did. The wedding was everything her mother had dreamed of, elegant, expensive, and absolutely suffocating. June stood in the small chapel in her elaborate white dress, her hand clasped in George's, and spoke vows that felt like betrayals. She smiled when expected, accepted congratulations from guests who knew nothing of the silent scream in her chest, and danced with her new husband at the reception while her heart shattered into smaller and smaller pieces. George was kind that night in his way, trying to be gentle with his nervous bride. June closed her eyes and pretended she was somewhere else, with someone else, and afterward lay awake in the darkness, wondering how she would survive even one more day of this lie. But she did survive. Day after day, week after week, she played the role of Mrs. George Thornton with a skill she hadn't known she possessed. She managed his household, entertained his friends, smiled at his mother's endless criticisms, and at night she gave him what he needed to keep him satisfied and unsuspecting. All the while, she watched, waited. Every rider on the horizon made her heart leap. Every sound in the night brought her to her window, searching the darkness for a familiar silhouette. But Onas didn't come. April turned to May, and the snow finally melted, revealing green grass and wildflowers. The territorial situation began to stabilize. The governor pulled back some of the military patrols, and tensions eased slightly. June told herself this was good, that it meant Onas would be able to move more freely, to make his plans. Still, he didn't come. June began to wonder if she'd made a terrible mistake, if Onas had decided she wasn't worth the risk, or if something had happened to him. The not knowing was torture, worse than anything else. She grew thin, her appetite deserting her, and dark circles appeared beneath her eyes. George noticed her unhappiness, but attributed it to female troubles or the difficulty of adjusting to married life. He tried to cheer her with gifts and attention that only made everything worse. June bore it all with grim determination, clinging to the memory of Onas's promise, "I will find you, always." She had to believe that. Without it, she had nothing. 6 weeks after her wedding, June was in the garden cutting flowers when Martha hurried out, her face flushed with excitement. "Mrs. Thornton, there's a gentleman here to see Mr. Thornton. Says he has business to discuss regarding some horses." June's heart stopped. "What does he look like?" "Indian man," Martha said, lowering her voice. "Tall, long hair. Very intense looking." The flower basket fell from June's nerveless fingers. "Where is George?" "Still at his father's ranch, Ma'am. Won't be back until this evening." "I'll receive him," June said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Show him into the parlor." Martha looked uncertain. "Are you sure that's proper, Ma'am? With Mr. Thornton gone?" "It's fine, Martha. Just business. Show him in and then you may leave us. I'll call if I need anything." The housekeeper still looked doubtful, but did as instructed. June heard voices in the front hall, Martha's nervous flutter and a deeper rumble that made every nerve in her body come alive. Then footsteps approached the parlor. She turned from the window, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. And there he was. Onas stood in the doorway of George Thornton's parlor, looking like a wild thing trapped in a cage of civilization. His eyes found hers, and the intensity in them nearly brought her to her knees. "Mrs. Thornton," he said, and she heard everything beneath the formal words: longing, rage, desperation, love. "Your husband agreed to discuss some horses I'm selling. Is he available?" "He's away," June managed, though her voice shook. "He won't return until evening." "I see." Onas stepped into the room, his gaze never leaving her face. "Then perhaps we should reschedule." It was a test, June realized. He was giving her a chance to send him away, to choose the safe path. But she was done with safe. "Or perhaps we could discuss the matter anyway," she said, moving closer to him. "I'm familiar with my husband's business interests." Something fierce and triumphant flared in his eyes. "Are you certain? This particular transaction is complicated." "I'm certain." June glanced toward the doorway, listening for Martha's footsteps. The house was silent. "When?" "Tonight." Onas's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Pack what you can carry in a small bag. Practical clothes, nothing fancy. Leave it hidden by the garden gate. At midnight I'll be there." "What about George? I'll handle it." Onas's jaw tightened. "Just be ready, June. And trust me." "I do." She wanted to touch him, to throw herself into his arms, but they couldn't risk it. Not here, not now. "I trust you with my life." "Good." He stepped back, his expression once more cool and businesslike for anyone who might be watching. "Please, tell your husband I'll return another time. Good day, Mrs. Thornton." Then he was gone, leaving June standing in the parlor with her heart racing and hope burning in her chest for the first time in 6 weeks. He'd come for her. Just as he'd promised, he'd come. The rest of the day crawled by with agonizing slowness. June moved through her duties in a daze, her mind racing with plans and fears. She couldn't take much. Anything more than a small bag would be suspicious. She chose her most practical dress, a warm cloak, her mother's locket, the only piece of jewelry she truly cared about, and what little money she had hidden away. She hid the bag in the garden shed just before George returned home, dusty and tired from his day at the ranch. At dinner he spoke at length about cattle prices and water rights, apparently oblivious to his wife's distraction. "Are you feeling well, my dear?" he asked as they retired to the sitting room. "You seem pale." "Just tired," June lied. "Perhaps I'll retire early." "Good idea." George kissed her forehead with the proprietary affection she'd come to loathe. "I have some ledgers to review. I'll join you later." June climbed the stairs to their bedroom, her pulse pounding in her ears. She prepared for bed as usual, letting George's maid help her into her nightgown and braid her hair. But once the house had settled into silence, she dressed again in the practical clothes she'd hidden in her wardrobe, moving as quietly as possible. The clock in the hallway struck 11:30. In 30 minutes, Onas would be waiting. But George was still in his study. June could see the light beneath his door as she crept down the hallway. What if he decided to come to bed early? What if he discovered her absence? She forced herself to breathe slowly, to think. She couldn't wait in the house. Too much risk of being discovered. She would have to slip out now and wait in the garden. Moving with painful care, June descended the stairs and made her way to the back door. The hinges creaked softly as she eased it open, and she froze, listening for any sound from George's study. But the house remained quiet. She slipped outside into the cool night air, retrieving her bag from the shed and then moving to the garden gate. The moon was nearly full, casting everything in silver light. June pressed herself into the shadows by the fence and waited, every nerve strung tight. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. 11:40, 11:50. June's hands were shaking, her breath coming in short gasps. What if something had gone wrong? What if Onas couldn't get away? What if... A hand closed over her mouth, and a familiar voice whispered in her ear, "Don't scream. It's me." June sagged against Onas in relief. He'd approached from the other side of the fence, silent as a shadow. His arm came around her waist, steadying her. "Are you ready?" he murmured against her ear. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "My horse is just beyond those trees. We need to move quickly and quietly. Stay close to me." Onas helped her over the low fence, his hands strong and sure. They'd taken perhaps a dozen steps toward the trees when a voice rang out behind them. "June!" Her blood turned to ice. She spun to see George standing in the doorway of the house, his face twisted with shock and rage. "Get on the horse," Onas ordered, his voice hard as stone. "Now, June." "But now!" She ran. Behind her she heard George shouting, heard his footsteps pounding as he gave chase. Onas's horse materialized from the shadows, a magnificent black stallion that danced nervously as June grabbed for the saddle. Then Onas was there, lifting her up with effortless strength before swinging up behind her. George was almost upon them, his face purple with fury. "You savage bastard!" George roared. "You're stealing my wife! I'll have you hunted down and hanged!" "She was never yours," Onas said coldly. "She was always mine." He wheeled the horse around and dug in his heels. The stallion leaped forward, and they were flying through the night, leaving George's furious shouts behind them. June clung to the saddle horn, feeling Onas's arms around her, his chest solid against her back. They rode hard for what felt like hours, following paths only Onas knew, climbing higher into the mountains until even the lights of Santa Fe were lost behind them. Finally, in a sheltered canyon with a small stream, Onas pulled the horse to a stop. He dismounted and helped June down, and the moment her feet touched the ground, she threw herself into his arms. "I thought you'd never come," she sobbed against his chest. "I was so scared. I'm sorry." He held her tightly, his lips in her hair. "I'm so sorry it took so long. I had to wait until the territorial situation was stable enough, had to make arrangements, gather supplies. Every day I wasn't with you was torture. You're here now." June pulled back to look at his face, needing to confirm this was real. "You're here and we're together." "Yes." Onas cupped her face in his hands. "And no one is ever going to separate us again. I've arranged passage into Mexico for tomorrow. A man I trust is meeting us at dawn with supplies and horses. We'll cross the border and disappear. I have contacts in a village south of Chihuahua, people who won't ask questions. We can build a life there, June. A real life together." "What about George?" What about my family? Won't they come after us? Probably. Onas's expression was grim. But by the time they organize a search, we'll be long gone. And once we're in Mexico, American law can't touch us. Your husband can't force you back. June thought about George, about her parents, about the life she was leaving behind. She should feel guilt, she supposed, remorse for the scandal she was causing, the pain she would inflict on her family. But all she felt was relief, bone-deep, overwhelming relief that she was finally free. "I love you," she said, rising on her toes to kiss him. "I love you so much, Onas, and I choose you. I will always choose you, and I choose you," he replied fiercely. "Forever, June. No matter what comes." They made camp in the canyon, building a small fire and sharing the food Onas had brought. As they sat wrapped in blankets under the vast canopy of stars, June felt peace settle over her for the first time in months. "Tell me about this village," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. "Tell me about our life there." "It's small," Onas said, his arm around her. "Simple. Nothing like what you're used to. We'll have to work hard. I'll probably hire out as a guide or translator, and you—" "I'll do whatever needs doing," June interrupted. "I'm not afraid of work, Onas. I'm only afraid of losing you." He kissed the top of her head. "You won't lose me. I'm yours, June. Body, heart, and soul. For as long as I draw breath." They talked through the night, making plans and dreams, until exhaustion finally claimed them both. June fell asleep in Onas's arms, feeling safer than she ever had in her life. Dawn came cold and clear. Onas's contact arrived as promised, a grizzled Mexican trader named Carlos who asked no questions and accepted Onas's payment with a knowing nod. He provided them with 2 additional horses loaded with supplies, rough trail clothes for June, and a map showing safe routes into Mexico. "Vaya con Dios," Carlos said before riding away. "May you find peace, amigos." They rode south for 3 days, taking paths that avoided settlements and travelers. At night, they camped under the stars, and Onas taught June the skills she would need for their new life: how to read the land, how to find water, how to move silently through rough terrain. And each night, they made love with the desperation of 2 people who had nearly lost each other, cementing their bond in the most primal way possible. On the 4th day, they crossed into Mexico. June felt the moment it happened, a subtle shift in the landscape, a lightening of the weight she'd been carrying. They were beyond the reach of American law now, beyond George's claim, beyond her family's expectations. They were free. The village Onas had spoken of was indeed small, perhaps 50 adobe houses clustered around a central plaza with a church and a cantina. The people regarded them with curiosity but not hostility, and when Onas explained in Spanish that they were seeking a place to settle, an old woman named Maria offered them a small house at the edge of the village. "It belonged to my son," she explained in Spanish, which Onas translated for June. "He moved to the city years ago. You can stay here, work the land. It's not much, but it's yours if you want it." "We want it," June said in her halting Spanish, and Maria smiled. They settled into their new life with surprising ease. The villagers accepted them as Señor and Señora Onas, not caring about their complicated past. Onas found work as a translator and guide for traders passing through, while June learned to manage their small household and garden with help from the village women. It was hard work, harder than anything June had known in her privileged life. Her hands grew calloused, her skin tanned by the sun. She learned to cook over an open fire, to wash clothes in the river, to make do with very little. And she had never been happier. In their small house, with its earthen floor and simple furnishings, June discovered what it meant to truly live. She woke each morning to Onas's arms around her, spent her days working alongside him, and fell asleep each night to his heartbeat beneath her ear. They argued sometimes, about money, about practical matters, about the adjustment to such a different life. But they always came back together, their love stronger for having weathered conflict. "Do you regret it?" Onas asked one evening as they sat on their small porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. "Giving up everything you had?" June looked at their house, shabby by her old standards, but filled with more love than the Whitecliff mansion had ever held. She looked at her rough, capable hands, so different from the soft, manicured fingers that had once poured tea in elegant parlors. And she looked at Onas, This fierce, beautiful man who had risked everything to claim her. Not for a single moment, she said firmly. This life, our life, is worth more than all the silk dresses and fancy dinners in the world. Onas smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that still made her heart skip. You're extraordinary, you know that? How many women would trade a mansion for an adobe hut and call it a fair exchange? The one who loves you, June replied simply. That's who. 4 months after they'd fled New Mexico, June began to suspect she was pregnant. She waited to be certain before telling Onas, afraid to believe it herself. But when she finally confirmed it with one of the village midwives, she could no longer contain her joy. She told him that evening as they prepared dinner together, a simple meal of beans and tortillas that tasted better than any feast from her old life. Onas, she said, watching him slice vegetables with practiced efficiency. I have something to tell you. He looked up, immediately alert to the tremor in her voice. What is it? Are you unwell? No. June took his hand and placed it on her still flat belly. I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby. For a moment, Onas simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his face transformed, shock giving way to wonder, wonder to fierce, possessive joy. He dropped to his knees in front of her, pressing his face against her stomach, his arms wrapping around her hips. A child, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Our child. Are you happy? June asked, running her fingers through his long hair. Happy? He looked up at her, and there were tears in his eyes. June, I don't have words. You've given me everything, love, freedom, and now this. A family. Something I never thought I'd have. June knelt down to join him, cupping his face in her hands. We'll be good parents, she promised. We'll teach our child about both our worlds, all the beauty in them. We'll raise them to be strong and free and full of love. Yes. Onas kissed her, tender and reverent. Yes, we will. Their son was born the following spring, delivered by Maria and the village midwives, while Onas paced outside like a caged animal. The moment he heard the baby's first cry, he burst into the room, despite the women's protests, and fell to his knees beside the bed, where June lay exhausted but radiant, cradling their child. A son, she said, her voice hoarse but filled with joy. We have a son, Onas. He looked at the tiny, perfect creature in her arms, dark hair like his own, June's blue eyes already showing signs of curiosity about the world. Something fierce and protective surged through him, a love so intense it was almost painful. He's beautiful, Onas breathed, carefully touching one tiny fist. Like his mother. And strong, June added. Like his father. They named him Gabriel, a bridge between cultures like he would be. Gabriel Onas, born free in a small Mexican village to parents who had defied the world to be together. Years passed. Gabriel grew from infant to toddler, to a bright, energetic boy who spoke Spanish, English, and Apache with equal fluency. He ran wild through the village with the other children, learning to ride before he could properly walk, absorbing knowledge about the world like a sponge. June and Onas built a good life. Onas's work as a guide and translator brought in enough money to support them, and June's garden provided food. They added rooms to their small house as needed, making it truly theirs. Sometimes June thought about her old life. She wondered if her parents had forgiven her, if George had remarried, if anyone still spoke her name in the parlors of Santa Fe. But those thoughts came less frequently as time passed, fading like old photographs. This was her life now, this house, this man, this child, and she wouldn't trade it for anything. One evening, when Gabriel was 4 years old, he climbed into June's lap as she sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Mama," he said in his child's voice, "Senora Maria says you and Papa came from far away, is that true?" June glanced at Onas, who had paused in his work, mending a saddle to listen. "Yes, mi amor," she said, smoothing Gabriel's dark hair. "We did. Why did you come here?" "Because," June chose her words carefully, "because your father and I loved each other, but there were people who didn't want us to be together, so we had to be very brave and leave everything behind to make a family." Gabriel considered this seriously. "Was it scary?" "Terrifying," June admitted, "but also wonderful, because it brought us here to you." "Will you tell me the story?" Gabriel asked, settling more comfortably against her chest. "About how you and Papa met." June looked at Onas, who smiled and came to sit beside them. Together they began to tell their son an edited version of their tale, of a beautiful woman and a fierce warrior, of impossible love and dangerous choices, of a promise kept and a freedom won. As she spoke, June felt Onas's hand find hers, their fingers interlacing automatically. She looked out at the mountains painted gold by the setting sun, at their simple but beloved home, at their son listening with rapt attention. This was the life she'd chosen, a life without luxury or ease, but rich in love and freedom and truth. A life where she woke each morning in the arms of a man who saw her completely and loved her anyway. A life where she could teach her son that courage sometimes meant giving up everything comfortable for something real. And they lived happily ever after, Gabriel asked when the story ended. June squeezed Onas's hand, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steadiness that had carried her through every storm. Yes, mi amor, she said softly. They did. They really did. Epilogue. 20 years later. The knock on the door came on a spring afternoon when the desert was in bloom and the air smelled of sage and possibility. June looked up from her weaving, now in her mid-40s, her once golden hair threaded with silver, her face bearing the marks of a life well lived under the Mexican sun. "I'll get it," called Gabriel, now a young man, tall and handsome, with his father's dark coloring and his mother's striking blue eyes. He worked as a translator and guide like Onas, but dreamed of becoming a teacher. June heard voices at the door, Gabriel's deep bass and another voice, older, trembling with emotion. Then Gabriel appeared in the doorway, his expression uncertain. "Mama," he said quietly, "there's someone here to see you. Someone from before." June set down her weaving, her heart suddenly pounding. In 20 years, no one from her old life had found them. She had assumed her family had given her up as lost, had written her out of their story. She stepped into the front room and stopped short. The woman standing there was elegant despite her travel-worn clothes, her hair grey but her bearing still proud. But it was her eyes, June's own eyes, that confirmed what her heart already knew. "Mother," June whispered. Eleanor Wycliffe stood in the doorway of her daughter's humble adobe home, tears streaming down her face. "June," she said brokenly, "my June, you're alive." "I'm alive." June found herself moving forward, and then they were embracing, two women who had lived very different lives but shared an unbreakable bond. When they finally pulled apart, Eleanor looked around the simple room, taking in the rough furniture, the earthen floor, the life her daughter had built. "How did you find me?" June asked. "I never stopped looking." Eleanor wiped her eyes. "Your father. He passed 3 years ago. But before he died, he told me to stop searching, to let you go. I couldn't. I hired investigators, followed every lead. And finally, I found you." Onas appeared in the doorway and Eleanor's eyes widened. She had aged in 20 years, but he was still recognizable as the man who had stolen her daughter. "Mrs. Wycliffe," Onas said quietly. "So you're welcome in our home." Eleanor looked between them, this unlikely couple who had defied the world to be together. Then her eyes fell on Gabriel, standing protectively near his mother, and she gasped. "This is your grandson," June said softly. Gabriel, this is your grandmother, Eleanor." Eleanor stared at the young man, seeing the blend of two worlds in his face, and something in her seemed to break and heal simultaneously. "A grandson," she whispered. "I have a grandson." They sat together on the porch as the sun began to set, and June told her mother everything, the full story she'd never been able to share. Eleanor listened, occasionally reaching for her daughter's hand, and when the tale was finished, she was quiet for a long time. "I was angry for so long," Eleanor finally said. "Angry at you for leaving, at him for taking you, at the whole impossible situation. But looking at you now," she touched June's face gently, "you're happy, truly happy, aren't you?" "Yes, Mother," June said simply, "more than I ever could have been in the life you wanted for me." Eleanor nodded slowly. "George remarried, you know, has 4 children. Your father's business passed to his sons-in-law. The scandal eventually faded. Life went on. And you?" June asked. "Have you been happy?" "Not as happy as I could have been," Eleanor admitted. "Not if I'd had the courage you showed, to choose love over propriety, to choose truth over comfort." She looked at Onas. "I misjudged you. I saw what I was taught to see, something dangerous and savage. I didn't see the man who loved my daughter enough to give her a life of freedom and truth. Thank you, Onas said quietly, for saying that, and for raising a daughter brave enough to choose her own path. Eleanor stayed for a week, getting to know her grandson and son-in-law, seeing the life June had built. Before she left, she held her daughter tightly. I can't change the past, Eleanor said, can't undo the years we lost, but I want to be part of your future if you'll let me. I want to know my grandson. I want to be a grandmother, not just a memory of a life you left behind. I'd like that, June said, her own eyes wet. I'd like that very much. They said goodbye with promises to write, to visit, to bridge the chasm that had separated them for 20 years. And as June watched her mother's carriage disappear down the dusty road, she felt Onas's arm come around her waist. Are you all right? He asked. Yes. June leaned into him, still marveling at how perfectly they fit together, even after all these years. I'm better than all right. For the first time, I don't feel like I had to choose between my old life and my new one. I can have both. You always could have, Onas said. But it took your mother 20 years to be brave enough to see it. That night, lying in bed with Onas's arms around her, and the sounds of their son moving about in his room, June thought about the long, strange journey that had brought her here, from the elegant parlors of Santa Fe to a small adobe house in Mexico, from a girl who knew nothing of hardship to a woman who had faced every challenge with courage and grace. Do you ever regret it? Onas asked, echoing the question he'd posed years ago. All that you gave up? June smiled in the darkness. For you know my answer. I do, he agreed, but I like hearing you say it. I regret nothing, June said firmly, not one single moment, because everything I gave up, the wealth, the status, the comfortable life, it was all a cage, and you gave me wings. We gave each other wings, Onas corrected, kissing her temple. You freed me as much as I freed you, June. You showed me that love was worth any risk, any sacrifice. You gave me a family when I thought I'd always be alone. Then we're even, June teased. Never, Onas said seriously. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you and never quite manage it. Foolish man, June murmured, turning in his arms to face him. You've deserved me from the moment you kept your promise, from the moment you came for me, just like you swore you would. She kissed him then, this man who had been called cruel and savage, who had proved to be anything but. This man who had loved her enough to wait, to plan, to risk everything to give her a life worth living. Outside, the desert night was alive with sound, crickets chirping, an owl calling, the wind whispering secrets to the mountains. Inside their small home, June and Onas held each other close, still lovers after 20 years, still partners in the greatest adventure of their lives. And in the next room their son slept peacefully, the living proof that love could conquer impossible barriers, that courage could forge new paths, and that sometimes the greatest happiness came from having the strength to run toward something true, even when the whole world told you to stay safe and small. June had once been told that she belonged in parlors and drawing rooms, in a life of careful propriety and measured words. But she had discovered the truth. She belonged wherever love lived. She belonged with the man who saw her completely and loved her anyway. She belonged in this life they had built together, brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. She had escaped the kiss that changed everything, only to discover that what she was really escaping toward was freedom, truth, and a love that would last a lifetime. And as she drifted to sleep in Onas's arms, June smiled, knowing that the cruel Apache who had sworn to find her had kept every promise he'd ever made. He had found her. He had claimed her. He had loved her. And together they had built something beautiful from the ashes of everything they'd left behind. The end. Dear listener, you know what nobody tells you about getting older? That somewhere between your first grey hair and your last worry about what people think, you become dangerous. Dangerous in the best way. Dangerous to every lie you've ever been fed about who you should be. June's story isn't just a romance. It's a mirror. And if you're listening to this, I want you to see something in that mirror that might surprise you. You and June aren't so different. She lived in a world that built cages out of expectations and called them proper life. Sound familiar? Here's what strikes me most about this story. It wasn't the dramatic escape that saved June. It was the moment she admitted the truth to herself in that snowy meadow. I feel alive with him. 4 simple words that changed everything. Because once you admit what makes you feel alive, you can't unknow it. You can't go back to sleepwalking. And I wonder, what makes you feel alive? Not what made you feel alive 40 years ago. Not what your children think should make you happy. Not what the retirement brochures promise. Right now. Today. What lights that spark behind your eyes? Maybe it's painting, but you haven't picked up a brush since 1987. Maybe it's learning Italian, but you think you're too old for new languages. Maybe it's finally writing that letter to someone who never knew how much they meant to you. Maybe it's just admitting that you're tired of pretending the life you have is the life you wanted. Here's the truth they don't put in greeting cards. You still have time. Not infinite time, none of us do, but enough time. Enough time to choose one true thing over 1,000 comfortable lies. Enough time to let yourself want something again. Enough time to be brave in small ways that feel enormous. Tonight, I'm not going to tell you to let go of your regrets. That's therapist talk, and it rarely works. Instead, I'll say this: let your regrets teach you what matters. Every road you didn't take is information. Every dream you shelved is a clue. They're telling you what your soul values, what your heart still wants, what would make the time you have left feel like yours. Rest well, wild soul. The desert night is gentle with those who finally stopped running from themselves. With deep respect for the truth you carry, Wild West Whispers team, thank you for staying with us until the very end. We hope this story gave your heart a moment of warmth, escape, and maybe even healing. If you felt something along the way, a tear, a smile, a memory, we kindly ask you to like, comment, and share this video, and to subscribe to Wild West Whispers. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for being part of this journey. Your support keeps this dream alive and motivates us to keep telling stories full of love, redemption, and emotional twists you'll never forget. And remember, at the very end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another story from our channel. Click it and discover something beautiful waiting just around the corner. Thank you for being here, the Wild West Whispers team.